So we're going to skip the beginning of the little intro here and just go on to the middle of this page here. And so we talked about the kinetic energy formula, and we found out how to find out how much kinetic energy an object has if we know its mass and its velocity. However, we can manipulate that equation around. What if we know the kinetic energy and the mass? We can use that same formula to figure out the velocity of an object. So velocity of an object, using that same equation but manipulate it around and solving for v, is equal to the kinetic energy divided by 0.5 times the mass, and this whole expression square rooted. Okay, and the mass is equal to your kinetic energy divided by 0.5 times your velocity squared. Right? So in order to solve this equation for velocity, what we need to do is solve everything inside of the square root first. Right? So you gotta do all the operations inside the square root, then you take the root. For finding the mass, right, don't forget to square the velocity first. Okay? Then multiply by 0.5. Right. Now, these equations are a little bit harder to work with than the kinetic energy, and for the purposes of grade 10, all I really want you to be able to do is find kinetic energy, but as soon as you get into grade 11, you need to solve for velocity and mass, so I do want to expose you to these kind of questions and do a couple of practice questions with these as well. All right, so let's do some practice questions. All right, the first question is, we have a 46 kilogram cheetah has a kinetic energy of 1500 joules. How fast is it running? So in the question, we're given the mass of the cheetah, which is 46 kilograms. We're given the kinetic energy, which is 15,500 joules. And we're asked to find the velocity. So our first step is always to write out what our unknowns and knowns are, right? Then we write out our equation. Well, our velocity is equal to a kinetic energy. And once again, you don't have to memorize this equation, it'll be given to you. 0.5 times your mass. And you take the square root of it. Okay? Next step is to plug in your numbers, substitute them in. Well, we have 15,500 for our kinetic energy, and our 0.5 times 46. Okay? And we take the square root of this whole thing. So the next step just becomes calculator work, right? And you need to be careful with how you use your calculator, right? So we're going to do everything inside of the square root first. So we're going to do all of this first before we take the square root, right? So we have 15,500 divided by 0.5, and it's divided by 46. If you're not going to use brackets, this is the correct way you can enter this information into your calculator. So I hit equals, and I get 673.913. So we're going to need to take the square root of that number. Square root of 673.913, right? and you take the square root of that number, right? And I'm going to just use the memory that's inside of my calculator, so I don't have to write that number down. So square root of my previous answer, and it equals to 25.959. 25.959, right? So this is saying our velocity is 26 meters per second. Moving on to the next question, right? It's asking us, what is the mass of a falcon flying at 88.9 meters per second with a kinetic energy of 1,700 joules, or 1,780 joules. So our first step is write out our unknowns and known values. The mass is what we're trying to find out. We are given a velocity of 88.9 meters per second and a kinetic energy of 1,780 joules. Right? Next step, write out our equation. Right? Our equation is up here. Mass is equal to our kinetic energy divided by 0.5 times our velocity squared. Next step is we plug in the numbers. Kinetic energy is 1,780 divided by 0.5 times our velocity squared. Okay. So we want to square our velocity first. Right? So I'm going to show you this two ways on your calculator, depending on how comfortable you are to use your calculator. So you can go do the denominator first. So we have 88.9 squared. And I'm going to multiply that by 0.5. That is our calculation in the denominator. Then I'm going to take our numerator, 1,780, divided by our denominator value, 3951.605. We end up with 0.450. So our mass is 0.450 kilograms. Right? Now, if you're comfortable with using your calculator, you can try doing this all in one step, and it would look like this. There's multiple different ways you can tackle this. I'll go divide by 0.5, and I'll divide by 88.9 squared, right? And this equals the exact same number, right? So if you don't end up with the exact same number, just go back and do the calculation in the denominator first, write out those numbers, and divide the top number from the bottom number, right? So by calculating it out, we find the mass is equal to 0.450 kilograms.